What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and this is another video in the series called Videos where I talk about cool lists that won GTs and stuff that doesn't have a name yet. Let me know down in the comments what you think this video series should be called. Also, if you like this series and you like me talking about weird and wacky tournament lists that win GTs, like and subscribe so I know that you like it so I can do more. Anyway, today we are talking about Tyler Hepler's win this past weekend with a Tyranid list. And while there were some pretty cool lists that went 5-0 over the past weekend, you know I got to support my buggy boys and talk about it when Tyranids win. We did just get all of these new and exciting rules from Warzone Octarius, and this past weekend we did see them start to get some play. As always, in this video we're going to talk about the list, the event that it played at, as well as go through all of the matchups that it played, talking about exactly what makes this list tick and why it did so well. The event in question is Ocotillo Onslaught in Glendale, Arizona. This was a 30-person GT, and it was streamed by Smite Club 40k. I reached out to them for permission to use clips of the video. Unfortunately, I didn't hear back from them, so I won't be showing any of their coverage here, but you can go check them out, Smite Club 40k on YouTube. They do have coverage from all 5 rounds, and including the final round, which does feature this list. The event had some pretty cool special rules as well, including a progressive battle ready score that gave you more points the more of your army was battle ready painted. I think this is a good happy medium between the normal all or nothing battle ready score, where if your army's painted you get 10 points, if it's not you don't. That can be a little feel badsy if, for example, you have to borrow a model, one of your models breaks, you just bought a new character and didn't have time to paint them, and that immediately docks you the full 10 points. In this system, it only docks you 1 or 2 points, which is a lot less feel badsy. The weird part about 40k currently is the inconsistent implementation of these battle ready paint scores. A lot of events don't use them, some events do, but I do think that this slightly less granular approach is probably a pretty good way to do it. The event also had some very cool player-placed terrain feature rules. It used kind of a hybrid player-placed terrain rules where the most important line of sight blockers on the table were already preset per the mission diagrams, and they did have terrain layout diagrams available for each of the missions that was being played. But then, after the roll to go first, each player picks one of 3 pools of terrain and sets it up on their side of the table. So, not only did this give players control over the terrain layout on the table, being able to set up their own line of sight blockers and terrain as they saw fit, but it also gave them a little bit more control where they could take, more line of sight blockers or more dense cover depending on the matchup and what exactly they wanted to use in that particular game. The one thing I'm always worried about with player-placed terrain is the fact that terrain in 40k is basically determines a lot of matchups. A lot of factions live or die based on how well the terrain is set up on the table, which not only adds an additional skill to 40k, which isn't the worst thing, but it does make it a little bit harder to get into for a new player or someone who's not used to that format. But it also means that a misplaced terrain feature, or maybe, just not having enough terrain features to be able to effectively set up the terrain using player-placed rules could really screw you if you don't have line of sight blockers at a perfect angle in a good spot. A good solution to this, obviously, is setting up those line of sight blockers on every single table every time, and then giving players more control over the peripheral pieces. I think this is a really cool system, and I would like to see more of it in the future. I think it's really solid. Like we said, the event had 30 players in it and had a pretty good spread of different factions. We did see, obviously, an extra representation of Space Marines, which is always to be expected, given that they are made up of the most sub-factions and also are the most popular faction, but also 2 Drukhari, 3 Edmec, 3 Orcs, so we're also seeing a high representation of those top big 3 factions, at least for now. The November rebalance did just hit, and those factions got dumpstered pretty hard. I don't know if it's going to really change them from being the best, but it may reduce their win rate significantly. There's also some interesting meta insights here with 3 Adeptus Custodes in this metagame, as well as, I will turn your attention to 4 Dark Angels players, 4 of them. 4 Dark Angels! There's more Dark Angels than there are Adeptus Mechanicus or Orcs. There's also a pretty solid representation of Chaos subfactions with some Thousand Suns, mixed Slanesh, as well as standard Chaos Space Marines, as well as even Chaos Knights. And I will direct your attention to the absolute legend. I want to shout out Taylor McCormick for submitting an Adeptus Titanicus list. That's right, the single Warhound Titan list. Absolute badass. But anyway, let's move on and talk about what everyone's here for. The actual list that went 5-0 at this event using a bunch of Tyranid models. This is technically a Forces of the Hivemind list because it is a Tyranid detachment plus a Genestealer cult detachment. So while everything's Tyranid keyworded, it's not pure Codex Tyranids and all that stuff. But I think it's still impressive given how little play both Tyranids and Genestealer cult are getting currently. Personally, I love pure Codex Tyranids, but I definitely understand that Genestealer cult does help shoring up some particular weaknesses that the Codex has. That said, this list is essentially an evolution of the standard mid-range Tyranid archetype that we've been seeing both in the pre-Octarius version of the faction and now in this post-Octarius metagame. I think moving forward, we're going to see a lot of lists that look very similar to this, that are built off of the core of 2 Genestealer units, 1 Devourer Termagant unit, 1 Hiveguard unit, alongside the Swarmlord, some characters to provide buffs, a Maleceptor, and then support units to taste. This list obviously follows that template pretty well. We do have the Swarmlord as well as a Tyranid Prime to be the Warlord trait caddy. He's got Swarmlord to give people rerolls, as well as Strategic Adaptation and the Adaptive Neural Lobe to give that pre-game redeploy, as well as the CP farming on enemy CP spent. He's also got Unchecked Ferocity, so the Synaptic Link, which is something that I have yet to play with, but I actually think is probably very powerful, especially on these Bing Genestealer units. Giving them that Gene Rot Might effect on a unit that's making 64 attacks is pretty solid, especially since you're already fishing for 6s to hit, given that you're probably relentless flurrying them. So you can Swarm Leader the Genestealer unit. Once you attack, just reroll everything that's not a 6 using that Swarm Leader reroll. That nets you a ridiculous amount of damage and lets these Genestealers punch significantly above their weight class. Obviously, it's a big commitment of buffs and CPs, but it does let Genestealers actually make back that relatively expensive 13 points per model cost and deal some significant damage to units that are much more resilient than they are. We also have the Devourer Termagant unit in there. I do think this unit has gotten a new lease on life, again, thanks to that Relentless Flurry stratagem. Given that they're not a Genestealer unit, it does only cost 1 CP on them, and gives them Teslaing 6s with their ranged attacks because they're a large unit. That means that you can basically do the exact same combo with giving them +1 to hit and then Swarm Leader and rerolling a bunch of their hit rolls to try to fish for those Tesla hits, on average generating significantly more hits than you started out with shots. Alongside a double tap from Single-Minded Annihilation, that does mean that these Devourer Termagants can actually kill even armored vehicles. T7 3+ armor save vehicles actually melt before the unending onslaught of Devourer Termagant shooting, just based on the sheer number of hits that they generate. You'll average 13 or 14 damage into a profile like a Redemptor, meaning that when all the buffs are applied, these guys will actually just shoot Dreadnoughts to death, which is pretty cool. We also have a big Tyranid Warrior unit equipped with a bunch of Lash Whips and Bone Swords. That gives these guys a little bit of staying power, especially against fast melee stuff. I'm thinking of Drakari specifically, which is helpful. That's in addition to the Hiveguard unit, which has been upgraded with Enhanced Resistance to give them that Ignore AP1 and AP2 effect. Very good against enemy counter battery, especially when combined with the Venomthropes that are already in the list. I do love me some Venomthropes. These guys are pretty useful just as a utility unit to sit in the back and perform actions, and broadcasting that -1 to hit, especially if you're not relying on monsters, meaning that killing that 3rd Zoanthrope in the unit doesn't remove the buff from monsters, does make Hiveguard relatively difficult to deal with, especially for low accuracy indirect fire that's coming at them. Factions like Orcs, at least Orcs before the Freebooter chain starts going off, or Astra Militarum, do have a tough time actually getting through that -1 to hit. We have the Maleceptor in there, who has been upgraded with Focal Essence. That's mostly to buff the Hiveguard, but also can affect other units with that pseudo rending effect, giving it additional AP on wound rolls of 6. But the reroll damage rolls on the Hiveguard unit is a really big deal. It's really cool that we see the Maleceptor in play a little bit more. They are pretty pricey, but at a Hive Tyrant defensive profile, and mostly just a big chunk of hit points and a 4+ invulnerable save that your opponent doesn't want to actually attack into, gives you kind of a threatening Psyker in the midfield that can run around and score secondary objectives and just be really annoying to deal with. Not to mention the fact that the profile matchups in the metagame currently are very important for the Maleceptor stratagem and Cephalic Diffusion. Especially giving that -1 strength to attack a unit like Hiveguard means that, for example, a Ruckatrek Squigbuggy or a Dakajet, going back to that Orc matchup, are going to be -1 to wound. That's a pretty big deal when you're trying to deal with this unit that's also ignoring your AP1 and AP2, probably has a damage ignore roll either from Leviathan or from Catalyst, and is often in cover and -1 to be hit. We also have 2 Sky Slasher Swarms. I absolutely love these little guys, especially with the stratagem to make them objective secured from Warzone Octarius. They can just be an annoying little unit that runs 12 inches and steals objectives away from people. They also almost automatically get engaged on all fronts in turn 1, which is something that Tyranids can struggle with, unless they're moving very aggressively forward, which is not not something you always want to do with Tyranids, and are just a very solid utility unit. I love me some Sky Slasher Swarms. Speaking of utility, we also have a patrol detachment coming out of Genestealer Cult. This detachment is basically utility personified. We do have a Magus in there to shore up what is kind of a little bit of a weak psychic presence in the primary detachment. With only the Swarmlord and the Maliceptor in that detachment, we're a little bit low on psychic phase damage, but the Magus does shore that up a little bit. The Magus is also bringing Massive Gnosis for that Ignore Overwatch on a stick, which can be very useful, especially if you're trying to play aggressively with Genestealers. And the Mind Control power, which can be fun, lets you shoot with a unit as if it were the shooting phase, which can be absolutely brutal, especially if you target something particularly powerful with it. That's followed up by 2 units of Acolyte Hybrids. These are equipped with Hand Flamers, which definitely helps against light infantry like Drukhari, and these units are also obviously just excellent at performing secondaries. They can Deep Strike onto the table, using Cult Ambush, then perform Retrieve Octaria's data or grab Engage on all fronts. They're basically like Lictors, except they're also troops and have OBSEC and have a gun, which is pretty nice. Whether or not that's worth the 2 CP over just taking additional utility units in the core Tyranid detachment, obviously Tyler believed that that was worth it, and who am I to question? Tyler is the one that went 5-0 in the GT. And speaking of that 5-0, let's talk about all of the matchups that this list played against. Now, fortunately for us, the missions that were played each round were made available in the GT rules pack, so we can actually talk about the particular missions in each of these matchups. Round 1, Tyler was up against Chaos, being piloted by Troy. This was on Retrieval mission, and this is a Slanesh-focused mixed Chaos list, bringing a bunch of demons, including 2 Keepers of Secrets, as well as Shalaxi Hellbane, alongside a Flawless Host detachment with 2 Lords Discordant on Hellstalkers and 2 Mauler Fiends. This is a very spicy Chaos Demon style of list, bringing a ton of monsters and scary vehicle characters that are going to run across the table and aggro you. Unfortunately for this style of list, Tyranids, I think, tend to have their number. The amount of damage that Hiveguard deal to this army, especially alongside the new Octaria's buffs, is absolutely phenomenal. And especially with the interactions we talked about with that Gene Rot Might effect alongside Relentless Flurry for Teslaing 6s on a Genestealer unit, the amount of damage that Genestealers do to these models is unreasonable. Unfortunately, I think this is going to be an uphill battle from the start for the Slanesh player, especially on top of the fact that this was Retrieval mission, which is a very defensively oriented mission with a long rush distance between the 2 deployment zones, since it's a short table edge mission and the players can deploy back. That means that even if the Keepers of Secret get to go first and blitz across the table to take up as much table space as possible, it's still not guaranteed that they're in charge range next turn, and the Tyranids can use their superlative mobility to movement block them or make it difficult for them to get across the table to allow the Hiveguard to fire again and potentially deal enough damage to cripple the Chaos Army. That ended up being an 87-48 win for Tyler and moved us on to round 2, where Tyler played again against Chaos, this time World Eaters, piloted by Mark. This one was on Scorched Earth, a little bit more of an aggressive mission with those 2 side objectives, which often create kind of a base trade yin-yang situation. And this is another spicy Chaos list we saw the Tyranids fight up against. This was a pure World Eaters list, bringing, wait for it, hold on. You might want to sit down, I'm not sure you're ready. 3 Vindicators. That's right, a little Vindicator tank seeing some play. I absolutely love it. Alongside several units of Khorne Berserkers and Rhinos, a Lord of Skulls. Now, normally when I see a Khorne Lord of Skulls in a majority Khorne list, I'm thinking, haha, we're gonna Crimson Crown combo. But there's no Crimson Crown combo here. We're playing World Eaters. So I think for the most part, we were, again, trying to run across the table with a bunch of melee units as well as these relatively short-range Chaos Vindicators and deal as much damage as possible. But with the amount of damage that these new Octarius Tyranids do, especially with the relatively poor defensive profiles of Codex Chaos Space Marine units, obviously the Vindicators are relatively tough to take out with that toughness of 8, and the Khorne Lord of Skulls as well. But the infantry and characters in the army are relatively squishy, not yet having received that second wound, which is pretty crucial. That means that it gets pretty tough for them to trade up as much as they want to, since a single Genestealer can deal kind of a ridiculous amount of damage to a unit of Khorne Berserkers, which they are not very appreciative of. This ended up actually being a very close game and a 44-27 point win to Tyler. I'm not sure if the game completed with the scores that low. I'd be interested to see how it played out, but it might have been that the 2 armies were so aggressive they were keeping each other off balance on primary objective scores and were only able to score a couple VPs every round. With 2 Rhinos in the Chaos list alongside the mobility of the Tyranids list, I can definitely see that there's the potential that both armies just mutually annihilated, and eventually we came down to a board state where neither player was scoring very many points. That moved Tyler onto round 3, 3, where I'm sensing a theme here. He played against Chaos again somehow. This time it was a Thousand Suns list run by Gregory, playing mostly Thousand Suns stuff in a Cult of Duplicity detachment. This one bringing 2 Exalted Sorcerers, as well as an Infernal Master, a smattering of Rubric Marines and Zongors, supporting 2 big blocks of Scarab Occult Terminators, alongside 2 Volkite Contemptor Dreadnoughts. The spice in the list was a Mutalith Vortex Beast, which we're seeing with increased regularity in Thousand Suns lists, which I think is very cool because the model is sweet, actually, and has some very unique mechanics, which I really like. This one was on Surround and Destroy, so another relatively aggressive long table edge mission, and I imagine the additional inclusion of these extra utility units in the Tyranid list gave Tyler a big leg up in this matchup. The ability to throw Sky Slasher Swarms, Hormagaunts, and just Genestealer Cult Acolytes up around the table in order to block off important positions to Sorceress Facade into gives Tyranids a lot of control in this particular matchup, and stops the Thousand Suns from being able to dump as many mortal wounds onto a particular hard target as they want to. A big downside for Tyranids in the matchup is the fact that a lot of their damage output is in those 1 damage attacks that are going to be affected by Allah's Dust, but given the immense damage out of the Hiveguard unit, especially with those reroll damage rolls from the Maleceptor, I do think that that unit can tip the difference and deal significant damage to units like Scarab Occult Terminators. That ended up being a relatively close 71-51 win for Tyler, and moved us on to round 4, where he did break the streak of playing against Chaos factions, playing against Orcs. Now, this is a bit of a non-standard version of Orcs. It's not the Freebooters gun line we typically see. Instead, it was a Beast Boy-focused Kill Rig Rush. This was bringing a patrol detachment with 3 Knobs on Smash-A-Squigs. I think these are kind of a breakout star of the new Orcs released, being incredibly efficient for only 65 points and dealing significant damage while getting that character protection and being relatively hard to kill in response. In addition, we have a Beast Boss and Squigosaur, as well as a custom Force Field Big Mech for that delicious invulnerable save. We've got a couple units of Squig Hog Boys, as well as some Beast Snaggers to go into 2 kill rigs. That's followed up by a battalion detachment, bringing a Warboss on a Warbike, as well as a Weird Boy, some more Beast Snagga Boys to go into those kill rigs, as well as a truck full of Burna Boys, and some utility units including Storm Boys and a Burna Bomber. Now, I've played against lists very similar to this archetype recently, and they are pretty effective, especially if they're able to win the roll to go first and basically do the dedicated transport thing, where they put a bunch of dedicated transports in the center of the table and force you to deal with them. The difference between these and lists like Drukhari is that those dedicated transports are also T8 murder machines with auto-hitting las cannons and 14 melee attacks. It's often difficult for an army like Tyranids that tends to cap out at strength 8 to deal with this glut of T8 wounds that are sitting in the middle of the table. Going first definitely helps in this matchup because you're able to hit the kill rigs and potentially kill 1 or 2 before they're able to deliver their contents into the center of the table. Now, with the amount of movement blocking that Tyranids have access to, I don't think it's necessarily a foregone conclusion if they end up going second in this matchup. I imagine that Tyler probably went first, given that he was able to close out this game with an absolutely dominating 87-42 point win. And that moved us on to the final round, where Tyler played against Donovan and his Dark Angels. We got one of those 4 Dark Angels players in the finals. Now, like I mentioned before, this round was streamed, so you can actually watch this entire game over on Smite Club 40k on their YouTube channel. The Dark Angels list is a little bit spicy and one that I actually really like the look of. It's bringing an Outrider and a Vanguard detachment to get all of the benefits of those Ravenwing and Deathwing rules. We have 2 Talon Masters in the Outrider detachment alongside a Chaplain on a bike, 2 units of attack bikes with multi-meltas, as well as several other bike squads, 2 Outriders, and 1 standard bike squad with a Combi Melta. The Vanguard detachment to bring those Deathwing guys in is bringing the ubiquitous Ravenwing Apothecary, as well as a Deathwing command squad, Azrael and Ezekiel, I absolutely love, alongside a big unit of Relic Terminators. Now, I've actually made an entire video about Relic Terminators and how efficient they are at shooting, and I do think that they are an excellent choice for a Deathwing detachment, because that does give them the access to that permanent transhuman effect, which means that they can act as sort of a bulwark unit that can just wander up the table, laying down pretty efficient shooting. Now, fortunately, we got to see the entire game play out. This game was on Overrun, and like I said, we did get to watch it play out. Dark Angels started castled up in a corner, unfortunately across from the Hive Guard, with their Terminator brick deployed on the line in the center. Unfortunately for them, Tyranids went first. I'm not sure if they used this strategic adaptation redeploy to move into a more aggressive position. I don't think that particular phase was caught on stream, but they were able to rocket a unit of Genestealers directly into the heart of the Dark Angel's army. Hiveguard, alongside those Genestealers, killed most of the Terminators and actually ended up successfully move blocking most of the castle into its little corner, with the Genestealer unit as well as a Hormigaunt unit that had Metabolic Overdrived up into an annoying position. The mobility of the Dark Angels list helped them out here, and they were able to make a play around the right-hand flank using Outriders to successfully break the movement block. Unfortunately for them, Overrun being a domination mission, which tends to favor the player going first, the Tyranids, using their mobility, were able to keep Dark Angels off balance for most of the game and stop them from scoring primary objectives, which ended up with Tyler winning the event 5-0 with a convincing 65 to 38 point victory. Generally speaking, I actually really like the Dark Angels matchup for Tyranids. I do think that Tyranids' mobility certainly helps them because they can at least match, if not exceed, the Ravenwing mobility with how fast their units can move. And if you are focused more on the Deathwing units, Tyranids will absolutely run circles around them. Obviously, it's difficult to actually kill Deathwing units, especially with units like Hiveguard that are disproportionately impacted by that transhuman effect. But if they can ever catch you, it doesn't really matter if you kill them quickly. You can smite them or just pick away at them individually over the course of the game, and eventually their army is going to be whittled down to nothing. An interesting profile matchup, though, is those Genestealers into that Terminator brick, given that the Genestealers are not affected by the transhuman effect, and with their Gene Rot Might effect from the Tyranid Prime, alongside the Teslaing 6s from Relentless Flurry, the amount of damage a Genestealer unit can do to these Terminator squads is actually obscene. Going first on Overrun certainly helps, but I do think that this matchup is pretty Tyranid favored from the get-go. And interestingly, I think that was the story throughout most of this event. Hitting Chaos lists 3 times in a row is very lucky for the Tyranids player. Like I said before, I think the Tyranid matchup into a lot of Chaos archetypes tends to be relatively Tyranid favored. And even the Orcs list that we saw them play into was a non-standard Orcs list, which does give Tyranids a little bit of interaction. If we saw the standard pre-November rebalance version of Orcs bringing a bunch of indirect fire alongside a bunch of planes that was very difficult for Tyranids to interact with, I think we could have seen this event go much differently for Tyler. At the end of the day, though, he was able to dodge that matchup and play into some good ones, obviously play very well, and take Tyranids with their new Octarius rules to a 5-0 victory. Huge congratulations to Tyler for taking down the event. I'm so excited to see this new Leviathan supplement in play, dealing some damage and taking down some wins, and I'm sure that we're going to see Tyranids near the top level of the metagame, at least for the foreseeable future. With the new Genestealer Code Codex getting released relatively soon as well, I can only imagine that lists like this are only going to get better as new rules get released. It's a good time for Tyranids, ladies and gentlemen. The age of the bug is upon us. But anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks as well to everyone who supports Tactical Tortoise over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. Also, YouTube channel members, you can join in the link down below the video. And Twitch subscribers, I stream basically 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday right now over on twitch.tv/tacticaltortoisetv. And everyone over there helps me keep the lights on and keep me streaming 40k stuff. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.